Hello and welcome to Payroll Accounting and Sales Tax 2018. Fresh new books. You'll probably have noticed there's a lot of disclaimers in your current book that talks about the fact that when they went to press, there were a lot of things that were still pending. So they had to use 2017 information. You will, of course, want to access your student website, Cengage Brain, in order to be able to have access to everything, including the updates as they are released, because sometimes those are released in early the following year. So we have some wonderful sets of slides. These are not the most engaging or visually appealing slides, and my apologies on that. These come from the publishers, but hopefully with some differences and some things, I'll be able to help you out a little bit and make them a little bit more engaging. So overall, here in this chapter, which is chapter number 1, we're going to look at some laws that affect the employers and their payroll operations, the record-keeping requirements of those laws. We're going to describe the employment procedures generally followed in a human resources department, and recognize the various personnel records that are used by businesses and outline the type of information that is shown on each form. And then identify the payroll register in the employee earnings records. Now, the payroll profession itself. This will actually be completed, all of these, in a bunch of mini lectures. So you're only going to get about 15 minutes at a time, and then it'll be another lecture. So let's start and let's think about the payroll profession. There is actually an entire sector of accounting that deals with nothing but payroll, and we'll actually talk about that in class. One of the things that is really interesting is that we now have some testing that revolves solely around payroll. This is things along the lines of the certified payroll professional, and I will have links to those types of certifications for you, so that if that is something that you are interested in doing, you can pursue that in the future. You can make payroll solely your focus in accounting. As you are all aware, accounting is multifaceted and really interesting in that you can just look at one aspect and do nothing but that aspect for an entire career and never learn 100% about everything, because things are changing. Dynamics are changing. In the case of payroll, we have changing laws. Typically payroll managers, so you're talking about the higher level, as a result of a 2017 Robert Half Associates survey, is reporting that their salaries are ranging from $63,750 to $98,750. Now that is a big wide range, but I want you to keep in mind that the Robert Half Associates surveys and a lot of the surveys that we have access to and that we report on for you, not only in business and accounting, but also in academia, look at the entire industry. So we have a far dynamic difference of cost of living in Colorado as compared to, say, Georgia, Louisiana, or Alabama. Even then, our cost of living in Colorado is considered quite a bit more reasonable as compared to some areas like California. So it's really important to understand that that's why sometimes there's a wide variety here. There's also a lot of different laws that come into play depending on which state you are in. We will focus on federal. We'll mention some state stuff, but we're not going to dig in on each state just because that would take several more classes than we have available. When you are working in a profession like payroll, though, it's very important that you stay abreast of everything that is going on because, as I said, and as the book really definitely points out, you see it in all throughout the book with these little green highlights, the Washington update, the change in administration, their expected changes to certain acts, things happen, Congress acts, minimum wages change, thresholds change for Social Security. You need to be aware of what all of these things are because they have bearing on your organization if you are a payroll professional in a corporation, or perhaps you are offering payroll services or working for a payroll company. You need to be able to advise your clients accordingly. There's also a code of ethics. This sets the directions for our profession. We find that in Figure 1.1. It is the APA, or the American Payroll Association Code of Ethics. It subscribes that you need to be mindful of the personal aspect of the payroll relationship between employer and employee, and to ensure that harmony is maintained through constant concern for the payroll professional's fellow employees. You need to strive for perfect compliance, accuracy, and timeliness of all payroll activities. You need to keep abreast of the state of the payroll art with regard to development in payroll technologies, to be current with legislative developments and actions on the part of regulatory bodies insofar as they affect payroll, to maintain the absolute confidentiality of the payroll within the procedures of the employer, to refrain from using association activities for one's personal self-interest or financial gain, to take as one's commitment the enhancement of one's professional abilities through the resources of the American Payroll Association, and to support one's fellow payroll professionals both within and outside one's organization. Like any other type of association, there's going to be a code of ethics. There's going to be rules to follow, but you will have great resources if you do choose to join the American Payroll Association to help keep you abreast and help keep you aware of those changing technologies, and a great network to be within. You can subscribe to your payroll, to what's called the Payroll Guide, which is a bi-weekly publication that is published by the American Payroll Association. These next couple of slides are actually the APA Code of Ethics, which I read out loud to you. Now, there's a lot of laws, and we're going to be going through these laws one by one and talking about them here. Most specifically in this first chapter, this is just kind of the background of why we have payroll professionals, why not just anybody should generate a paycheck. Because you want to be sure that everything is in compliance with regulatory laws. So some of the things that we're going to be looking at is the Fair Labor Standards Act, the Federal Insurance Contribution Act, income tax withholding laws, both federal, state, and even potentially local, the Unemployment Tax Acts, the Fair Employment Laws, some other federal laws that have come into play, state minimum wage and maximum hour laws, and other state-specific laws, and showing you how to find that information. It's very important that you do access the online information for these books. The reason for that is because when we went to publication, there was new administration and there may have been some changes. So here in this first particular lecture, I want to talk about the Fair Labor Standards Act. When we come into the classroom, we will dig into some of these some more. Let's start with the general overview type of information. I will show you resources you have in Canvas, links that will get you to where if you need to dig down for more information. All of these are great links and resources for you in the future in the business. So, make a cheat sheet of links and things with notes on what you might look for there, where you might look for updates, what applies, what's going on. So when we went to print, the federal minimum wage was $7.25 an hour. This is the result of the Federal Wage and Hour Law of 1938 as part of the Fair Labor Standards Act. It calls for equal pay for equal work provisions, which is one of the biggest things we have seen. It addresses the employment of child labor, public service contracts, and even wage garnishment. It sets the laws for a variety of companies that are involved in interstate commerce. This means when they cross state lines, or in the production of goods or services for interstate commerce. It calls that there are some specific records that have to be maintained. Record retention is one of those things that we will talk about for this in Chapter 2. We also talk about it a little bit more here later in Chapter 1. Some of those records are the basis of wage differentials that are paid to employees of opposite sex for equal work. Um, there are posters that have to be displayed as the result of FLSA in your work. You have actually probably seen these, probably in the break room or near where your time card uh, clock is. It just really depends upon where they have set it up. But those are actually a requirement uh, of the Fair Labor Standards Act of employers to post those so that employees are aware of the provisions of the laws. If you're much like I was for many years, I don't think I ever read a single one of those posters before I became aware of them from an accounting and business perspective. And the Fair Labor Standards Act also deals with the state's minimum wage and maximum hour laws that help to establish the minimum wage rates for covered employees. Now, if there is both a federal minimum wage and a state minimum wage, the one that is higher prevails. And you will find this is the case with most employment related laws. If there is both a federal law and a state law in effect, the one that is most favorable to the employee is typically the one that is going to prevail. So if federal minimum wage is $7.25 an hour, but your state minimum wage is, let's say, $10.15, then the $10.15 is the prevailing wage for that state. Other things that we'll talk about is that various state wage orders, so they're elements of the Fair Labor Standards Act at a state level, come into play when it talks about waiting times, rest times, meal times, absences, and all those other things. So your federal laws are typically very or can be a little bit more broad. The states come in and they dial it in a little bit more specifically to their demographics. However, from state to state, those things can change. Some states have identical, there's high similarities, but there can be some really key differences depending on what state you are in. If you access your text and you look at page 1.4 on the net, there's a great little link there that actually shows you the different minimum wage laws by state in the form of a map. And you can see where states have enacted different minimum wages from the federal minimum wage. We will be addressing all of these laws as they're coming forward in other chapters as well. This first chapter is kind of a quick down and dirty. Here you go. This is the information broadly as we move into different chapters and we really start talking about FICA and some of this other information. You will get additional education and resources in relationship to these. So this is not the end-all be-all, but it is kind of the 5,000-foot overview. Now, FICA is the Federal Insurance Contribution Act, and it's comprised of two taxes. You are used to seeing this being taken out of your paychecks. This is the OASDI, which is the Old Age and Survivors Trust Fund and Federal Disability Insurance Trust Fund, and HI, which is the Health Insurance or Hospital Insurance Plan. This is Social Security and Medicare. These are covered and paid by both employer and employee. These taxes have been in place for a significant amount of time, and they both have actually a different threshold. These are not taxes that you can avoid if you are self-employed. And we go into much more greater detail on this in Chapter 3. Income tax withholding laws. This is something that we really dig into in Chapter 4, and we deal with the wage bracket method and percentage and so on and so forth. Are taxes that are levied on the earnings of employees at the point in which they are earned. That income tax is withheld from the paychecks You help guide what needs to be withheld from your paycheck by filling out your W-4. We'll actually look at that as well as how, from an employer's perspective, this is dealt with. In addition to the federal income tax, there can be some state income taxes and even local municipality income taxes that come into play depending upon where you live. The state of Colorado, I'm not aware of any local income taxes that are at play, but there are some areas that do have them. Again, this is going to be income tax that is withheld from the paychecks. It's going to differ based on the state or the municipality that is at play. And it's really important actually for you to know that not all states actually have a state income tax. Some states have zero income tax. Well, now that's really interesting to think about, right? Because our income taxes are part of how we fund all the variety of things that go on with our state governments. This is the state's contributions to education, the state's contributions to roads, to parks, to the infrastructure, to the emergency services. How do those states actually pay for that if they don't have an income tax? Well, the answer is typically that they have a much higher state sales tax than we have here in the state of Colorado. Our state sales tax is currently 2.9%. So we kind of split it up and we have multiple avenues of revenue. In those states, they have a higher sales tax. And they have less sources of revenue. In Chapter 5, we're going to really look at the Unemployment Tax Acts. Some of you may have actually had to file for unemployment in the state of Colorado or another state due to unfortunate circumstances that may have occurred, most especially around the recession of 2008. We experienced a ridiculously high rate of unemployment for a long period of time. This is also why then President Obama enacted in some special tax laws that gave employers breaks for a while to help spur employment to bring our unemployment back down. These are just the quick general facts on that. We will dig into it and really explain it. But basically, there is a federal unemployment tax act, and it says that of the first $7,000 that's paid to every employee, 6% of that is levied with a tax. However, if the employer has to pay a state unemployment tax, they can take a credit against it. These taxes that are paid to the federal level are not used to pay any of the state and are used to pay for the state and the federal administrative expenses of the unemployment division. They are not used to actually pay the unemployment benefits. So the checks that you get do not come from the amount that is given to the federal government. Now, there is mandatory unemployment insurance, and every state is going to be different at their rates and their credits and how they have experiential ratings, and every company can be different in the amount that they pay. There's usually a cap and there's usually a floor. Social Security outlines the standards that every state's unemployment compensation law must follow, but after that, it becomes designed more for the state. The taxes that are remitted to the state for SUTA, State Unemployment Tax Act, are what are used to actually pay the unemployment benefits. This is what is paid out to you as an employee if you need to file for unemployment. Now, before we start going into the various fair employment laws and then kicking through on things like, age discrimination, immigration reform, so on and so forth, we'll actually break at this exact point in time. Again, Chapter 1 is high level. Most of this stuff we are going to dig into very heavily as we address situations that are applicable to these. So that way you can kind of get a better familiarity. Be prepared for a lot of homework in this class because it is hybrid, and I will see you at our Wednesday webinar. Thank you.